Hello and welcome to a special interview with the British Foreign Secretary. How does Britain view the standoff between India and Pakistan, and beyond that, how does it view the scourge of terrorism? Those are the two key issues I shall explore today with David Miliband. Foreign Secretary, let's start with the India-Pakistan standoff in the wake of the Mumbai terror strike. The Indian government has given a dossier to your government containing the information or the evidence that it's collected. What's your assessment of the contents of that dossier?
Well, we are in absolutely no doubt about the origins of the attack in Mumbai in November. Those origins are in Pakistan, and there have been some detentions in Pakistan, and they now need to lead to successful prosecutions. We believe the evidence is there for that.
You used a very important word just now. You said, we believe the evidence is there. So do you see the dossier as containing evidence?
We have our own evidence, which we have shown to the Pakistani authorities, and we believe that that is the right evidence on which to proceed. The Indian dossier that's been handed over is something obviously that we are looking at. But I think what is critical is that the words of the Pakistani government, which are commitments to follow through on the perpetrators of these terrible crimes, should be followed through into action.
You say you have your own evidence which you've handed to the Pakistani government. What sort of evidence is this?
Well, obviously we don't go into that for a very simple reason. A court case is pending. It needs to take place.
All right, you said that you've made the evidence you have available to the Pakistani government. What response did you get from them?
Well, I think that, as it happens, I was in Pakistan on the day of the Mumbai atrocities, and then subsequently followed up in phone calls, and we'll be able to follow up in person. We've had some good words from the Pakistani authorities. We've also had the detentions, but that needs to be translated into action, because I know that Indians are sick of words. They don't want words about following up to tackle people who've committed terrorist outrages. They want action, and that's what I support as well.
What sort of action specifically are you looking for?
The action, I think, falls into two categories. There's short-term action to take those against whom there is evidence through the courts to justice, and if they are found guilty, to make sure they're appropriately punished. Secondly, there is a medium-term job, and that is to root out the terrorist networks that pose such a threat, not just to India, but to the fundamentals of the Pakistani state as well. And my message in Pakistan will be, don't just do a favour to Britain, which is threatened by terrorism that starts in Pakistan. Don't just do a favour to India, which is threatened by terrorism that starts in Pakistan. Do a favour to yourselves, because terrorism has already claimed the life of Benazir Bhutto and many other Pakistanis. They need to tackle it for their own good as well as ours.
All right, the Indian Prime Minister has gone on record to say that there is enough evidence to show that the attack must have had the support of some official agencies in Pakistan. Does Britain agree with that?
We don't have evidence to show that the attacks were directed by the Pakistani government. What we do know, and this is public knowledge, is that the Pakistani government has had a policy towards the Lashkar-e-Toiba under the previous regime of President Musharraf. And I think it's very important that that approach, the so-called corral and engage approach, is one that is changed, because it obviously doesn't work.
The Indian Prime Minister also has said that Pakistan has utilized terrorism as an instrument to state policy. Would you accept that?
I have no evidence of the Pakistani state directing terrorist activities, and I would never make that claim without that evidence. What I know is that Pakistan has a very serious terrorist problem.
But when you spoke about the policy of corralling the relationship that existed General Musharraf's time with the LET, what exactly was that relationship?
Well, it was an approach, I think I described it as, and it was an approach which recognized that LET did pose a threat, but also recognized that they had to engage with LET. And I think the important message that comes out, especially since the Mumbai bombings, is that you have to tackle the roots of these terrorist organizations. If they want to play in politics, that's one thing. But if they're going to use terrorist tactics, that's beyond the pale, and they need to be rooted out.
When you say approach, is that a euphemism for saying that there were links between the government of Pakistan and General Musharraf's time and the LET?
No. It's an approach is a policy. It's a very clear way of describing it.
A policy whereby the LET was utilized by the state for purposes of the state?
I've been very, very clear in every answer I've given you. We do not have evidence that the Pakistani state directs operations or directed operations by the LET. What is important is that we recognize that terrorism is a threat to Pakistan as well as to its neighbors and to countries like Britain. Secondly, that the roots of terrorism need to be addressed at the root, which are economic and social and political as well as security. And thirdly and importantly, Pakistan needs to address the fundamental political questions if it's to turn itself around.
Okay.
And in the end, India cannot afford a Cold War or a hot war with Pakistan, and Pakistan cannot afford a Cold War or
and
a hot war with India.
all of that is taken for granted both in India and I assume in Pakistan. But let me therefore pick up on something that you said maybe 3 times, maybe 4 times in this interview. The clear connection of what's happened in Mumbai to Pakistan and to actors in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan has taken some steps. Those are viewed in India as cosmetic. Some people regard them as deceptive. How does the British government view the steps that Pakistan has so far taken?
A start. A start, that's all they are. And you've got experience in this country of people being detained or arrested and then released. In this case, there's a very clear onus on the Pakistani authorities to take the people who've been detained, to assemble the evidence, to use it for prosecution, and then if people are found guilty, to make sure they are properly punished.
Let me put 2 bits of detail to you. You say what Pakistan has done is a start, but India looks at the fact and says that, for instance, the Jamaat-ud-Dawa is supposed to have been banned under decisions and sanctions taken by the United Nations Security Council, and yet the same organization is organizing rallies in Lahore, surrounded and escorted by the Punjab police. Its headquarters are functioning, its flag is fluttering, its armed guards are visible, its weekly is bringing out vituperative articles about India. Is that an effective implementation of the United Nations Security Council?
Obviously not, no.
And you're prepared to say that to the Pakistanis when you meet them?
Look, I have very, very open discussions with the Pakistanis which take forward what I say to you publicly. And the best sort of diplomacy is diplomacy where you're not saying one thing behind your hand privately and another thing publicly, but actually that you have the clarity and the consistency to say publicly what you are saying privately.
Absolutely. But India says that it's difficult to engage with Pakistan because of the contradictory signals that we get. For example, they point out that the National Security Advisor who publicly accepted that Qasab was Pakistani was peremptorily sacked by the Prime Minister on the grounds that he'd embarrassed Mr. Gilani and endangered state security. How do you respond to that one development?
Well, I think it's a good point that the Indian government or Indian commentators that you cite make. India must feel huge anguish, does feel huge anguish. I know that from my meetings with the Prime Minister and his ministers today. Huge anguish about the Mumbai bombings, and also huge frustration about the turn of events in Pakistan over a long period of time. Let's be honest about that. And what I would say is that from a British point of view, we have a massive national interest in seeing Pakistan become a country where one can talk about prosperity, about security, about peace, without people rolling their eyes. That's very important.
Can I interrupt and point out that India feels more than anguish? India feels that what it's seeing is a state of denial, what they call flip-flops or contradictory statements. And can you understand that to India this looks as if Pakistan, far from cooperating, is actually trying very hard not to cooperate?
Well, yes, I can understand that. And I think it's therefore important that people like me, from Britain, which itself suffers from attacks that originate in Pakistan, are absolutely clear about the responsibilities of the Pakistani authorities, all of them, in the government, the civilian government, but also in the armed forces. And we are clear about that.
And you will say this, Foreign Secretary, as bluntly and as clearly to the Pakistani leaders when you meet them on Friday as you are saying to me today?
Yes.
There's no doubt about that?
No.
Let's then come to...
In fact, I already have.
And you'll repeat it again then?
I will repeat it again. Now, the question is, do they follow through and how do they follow through? And it's very, very important that we keep emphasizing they need to do this for us, for you, but also for themselves. Because in the end, the threat to Pakistan comes from within, not from India.
Let me put to you 2 issues that Pakistan has repeatedly raised. First of all, they're asking for a joint investigative mechanism, which India, as you know, is extremely unenthusiastic about. Given the state of distrust between the 2 countries today, does Britain believe that a joint investigative mechanism makes sense or would be impractical?
I think the 2 countries should cooperate, but I don't adhere or specify the particular way in which they should cooperate. And so I think that the discussions about ministers or officials staying in contact and intensifying contact, that would be a good thing. But I'm not going to sign up to one particular version of the sort of relations between 2 independent states.
The second thing, and again it's been repeatedly said by the Pakistan Prime Minister, is that he will not extradite any of the accused. But given that we're talking about people who are not accused of common and garden crimes, but the heinous crime of terrorism, will Britain support India's request or demand for extradition?
Well, we will support their prosecution under Pakistani law.
But not extradition.
Well, no, because they have broken the law in Pakistan. It's Pakistani law that they've broken, as well as international decency and common sense.
But
And
if people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed can be extradited to America, and he's only one of many such, and they were extradited even without due process of law, then why can't those who've actually killed in Mumbai be extradited to India?
I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of the Pakistani constitutional position. What is important is that those who are accused of heinous crimes feel the full force of the law, whether in India or in Pakistan. Now, the Pakistani authorities have detained these people, and they've said that if there is evidence, they should be prosecuted. I say, there is evidence, let them be prosecuted, and if they are found guilty, let them be punished.
One last question before I take a break. If these people are not effectively and sufficiently prosecuted, or if there is such a delay that people begin to feel that Pakistan is simply dragging its feet, at that point of time, will Britain be prepared to support either economic or military sanctions against Islamabad to force the issue?
I don't think punishing the Pakistani people with economic sanctions is going to induce the sort of change that is necessary. In fact, it undermines precisely the sort of support that is necessary, because I think one of the things that needs to happen in Pakistan is its own people engaged in a far deeper conversation about the nature of the threat that is posed to Pakistani
but
society.
But if you
not
rule
just
out
to Indian
sanctions...
society. What I believe is that the international community should make absolutely clear to Pakistan it's not just its intentions, but its expectations. And it should continue to do that without fear or favour, and that is what we will do.
But what happens if Pakistan ignores the international community? Beyond trying to make it clear verbally, is there any sanction to force Pakistan to act?
We continue to use all the appropriate mechanisms, the appropriate ways of making a difference, because Pakistan
What is the appropriate way other than simply verbal pressure?
Well, because there are a whole range of relationships that we have with Pakistan, and there's a whole range of British engagement with Pakistan that I think can help demonstrate to the Pakistani government in all its forms that there isn't just pressure, there is support for change in the way Pakistan operates.
But at the end of the day, there's no stick that you can use.
I think that it depends. If you're saying, is there a military stick that I'm going
Not
to
a
wield?
military stick.
There's no military stick that I'm going to wield. But I think that there is a fundamental debate to be had in Pakistan. And you can see it because you're right. There are different statements that come out. What does that reveal? It reveals actually that there's a debate going on. And there's a debate between those who recognize that there is a serious need for reform in Pakistan and those who are, to use your words, in denial. It's very important that the reformers win.
And if they are not winning, then what?
We carry on exercising the pressure, providing the incentives, engaging.
But you're asking India to be patient forever.
No, I'm asking the Indians to do the right thing for themselves and for Pakistan, because a Cold War or a hot war is not in Pakistan's interest, and it's not in India's interest.
And what happens if there's another strike attributable to actors in Pakistan?
That is a very serious issue that we should preempt, and we preempt it, first of all, by the sort of changes that are being made to India's defences, and they have been put through in legislation by a government which I believe has taken strong and decisive action since the Mumbai events. And it's also by pressure within Pakistan. We do not need to wait for a further incident to know the severity of the threat that's faced.
All right, Foreign Secretary, let's take a break there. I want to come back and move away from the standoff between India and Pakistan and broaden our discussion. We'll be back in a moment's time. See you after the break. Welcome back to a special interview with the British Foreign Secretary, David Miliband. Foreign Secretary, how difficult a country has Pakistan become? How fragile has it become? How worrisome has it become?
I think fragile is a good word. Fragile for its own people. They've got a real economic crisis that has led to an IMF loan. And fragile also, given its political seesaw between civilian government and military rule. And fragile, thirdly and finally, because of the security dangers that terrorism originating in Pakistan poses to India, to Pakistan, and also to countries like Britain.
You spoke a moment ago about the seesawing between civilian and military rule. Where do you believe the center of power in Pakistan lies? With Asif Zardari, the president? With General Kayani, the army chief? Or with the ISI?
Well, like any seesaw, there's a seesaw, and sometimes one side is up and sometimes the other side is up. I think that the entry into power of a civilian government led by President Zardari is a significant event, one which we worked for very hard. And I don't believe the army, under General Kayani, want to take over power again.
At the moment, or do you see that being the case for the foreseeable future?
I see no indication that General Kayani wants to be other than Chief of the Army Staff.
What is your assessment of Asif Zardari as president?
I think that the negotiation of the IMF loan and now its implementation is significant and good. I think the assembly of a strong coalition is good, or a stronger coalition than people expected is also important. And I think that President Zardari has tried to do the right thing significantly in respect of Afghanistan, where relations were in deep freeze under President Musharraf, but now have opened up. But also on the security front, I think he recognizes in his heart, because of the tragedy that he suffered with the assassination of his wife, quite what a threat terrorism poses to Pakistan.
Let me tell you, in India, he's viewed as a man who says all the right things. He's hugely reassuring when he speaks to the Indian people in interviews, but no one believes he has the power to deliver. He may have the intention, but either the army or the wider establishment checks him.
Well, that's inevitable if you've been in power for 6 months.
So
no one in power for 6 months can prove that deeds follow actions, follow words. That it is inevitable that people are going to ask questions, and that's right. And that's why an issue like the prosecution of those detained after Mumbai is important.
Would you therefore say to the Indian government and maybe to the wider Indian people that they should be a little bit more understanding of the problems that Asif Zardari faces, that perhaps they should give him a bit more time rather than look for immediate results in action?
Well, understanding is a good thing compared to lack of understanding, inevitably. But I don't think I am here to plead for patience or for understanding. I think that the Indian sense of urgency is right. But I tell you this, the urgency for economic and social and political and security reform is felt in here by Pakistanis, because they suffer from this as well.
And you believe that Asif Zardari genuinely feels it in there, as you say?
This is a man who's lost his wife. And he knows what a threat terrorism poses to Pakistan. He also knows the economy that has been hard developed needs to be nurtured.
Another issue on the horizon at the moment, not just involving India and Pakistan, but this time involving Afghanistan as well, are comments made by President-elect Obama. He's gone on record to say that he believes that the solution to the problem in Afghanistan lies at least partly in sorting out the Kashmir problem. Would Britain accept the linkage between Afghanistan and Kashmir?
Well, in Britain we talk about Afghanistan and Pakistan as a single theatre, as a shared geographical...
He's talking about
ground.
Afghanistan and Kashmir.
Yeah, well, I'm deliberately talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan, and I think it's very important. I know there's great Kremlinology about one sentence that he's used in September or October about this. What I think
December the 7th, much more recently.
December the 7th, but nonetheless one sentence I think you'll find. And I think what's important is that President Obama and his new administration will be a new force on the global stage. I believe that they...
You're not answering my question.
Yeah, I'm trying to provide some understanding of what I think an Obama administration is going to bring. They're going to see Pakistan as absolutely central to their investment in a decent government in Afghanistan. They also know that the Kashmir conflict has been the source of flare-up over many years. And I think that many of us outside the region have felt that the composite dialogue and the deliberations that have taken place over Kashmir are welcome. But that is not to say they are part of the Afghan-Pakistan theatre.
So you don't accept the linkage between Afghanistan and Kashmir?
It depends what you mean by linkage. It's a fact that Pakistan has a contested border with Afghanistan and contested issues in respect of Kashmir. What I'm trying to say to you is that the Obama administration's breadth of vision about the problems of the region are not a threat to India. They're not equating India, they're not putting India into the same box, because I know from very senior contacts that the Obama administration will be talking about Afghanistan and Pakistan together, and that is important.
The Obama administration, and this time something that President-elect Obama has said repeatedly, not just once. He said it to Time magazine, he said it to MSNBC, he said it to NBC, is his desire to try and resolve Kashmir seriously, I'm not quoting him, to devote serious diplomatic resources to get a special envoy in there. Does Britain believe that the time has come for either an American or an international initiative to sort out Kashmir?
Well, that's not been our policy, no, actually. We've felt that the composite dialogue, so-called, between India and Pakistan is the right way forward. It's a bilateral issue. Now let's listen to what President Obama, which he will be in a week's time, actually says. And let's give him the space to explain what he means. I haven't had the chance yet to discuss in detail what that idea might be, but our position has been the bilateral track has been a good track and it should be used.
Foreign Secretary, a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.